All right. Hello, everybody else still joining us. Welcome, welcome. It's Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Wednesday evening, depends upon where you're at. And let's get started. Chris, floor is yours.
Yeah, well, we have 120 something registered today, everybody. I'm Chris Russell. I'm your new moderator for the JobSync Recruitment Marketing Roundtables, helping out the team there at JobSync on a fractional basis. So you're going to see my mug on these, and glad to be here. Today, we're going to talk about your questions answered. How will AI change recruiting operations? And we'll be joined by a couple of our guests today, Ben Hebert and Jeremy Lyons. We'll talk to them in a second. If you're in the chat there, tell us where you're from. We have questions that we got from the audience on the forum, so we have a bunch of those to go over today. And we're going to talk about the impact of artificial intelligence. It's changing everything from how we source candidates to how we screen applications, and even how candidates approach their job search. It's a topic that's sparking a lot of conversation out there, and probably a lot of the questions for us in the recruiting operations sphere. Let's talk about our guests here. With two fantastic guests joining us at the forefront of this transformation. Ben Hebert from Recruiting Operations at Google Fiber. Hey, Ben.
Hello, welcome. Thank you.
All right. Then we got Jeremy Lyons, co-founder of RecOps Collective. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, how's it going?
All righty. They'll be sharing their insights and discussing the nuances of AI's role and, most importantly, answering your questions about how AI is reshaping our industry. So, Ben and Jeremy, well, just take a moment here just to introduce yourselves to the audience and tell us a little more about you guys.
Ben, you go first in the alphabetical order, so why don't you go first?
Love it. Love it. Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Hebert. I lead the recruiting operations function at Google Fiber. And I've been in this role now for a little over a decade and at Google Fiber for about 3 years now. I'm an operations engineer by trade, self-proclaimed, and I love everything about hiring, how to do it well, and thinking about what does well mean.
And my name is Jeremy Lyons. I have been in the recruiting operations space now for 9+ years. I started RecOps Collective 2.5 years ago. I have been in the recruiting space for 30+ years. And if you say RecOps 3 times in a row, I will be summoned like Beetlejuice.
Do you have to hit your heels too at the same time or just say it? Like, is it more like the...
I prefer a spin, like a
spin
Fred
move. Got it.
Astaire, Ginger Rogers style
Got it.
spin. But
Did you say 30 years? Because you live 30.
I say 30 years because my mother was an executive recruiter. So I second generation recruiting.
Love it. And hi, everybody. My name is Leah Daniels. I lead the commercial business here for JobSync. If you're unfamiliar, JobSync builds technology and solutions that help recruiting marketing, recruiting operations much more efficiently, find candidates, bring them through the funnel. We do fun things like wrap your career site so you don't have an ATS experience, and enable a lot of the quick applies that exist out in the market to really bring an optimized candidate funnel. Our customers often find that they get significantly more candidate flow, better quality, and drive down their costs. So let's get started. Questions that we got were quite a few, but I'm going to start with the big one that I don't know who it is that submitted it, so it was all a little anonymous. But as we start to look at this world that we're moving into rapidly, what are the most immediate next steps that recruitment leaders need to take to ensure that they're ready for changes? And what are those long-term recommendations that you have? So what are the short-term things? What are the long-term things? And Ben, you look like you want to jump right on this question.
I have a couple of thoughts to this question. One, as part of the ongoing training, the enablement of being a recruiter and in the recruiting operations space, prompt engineering needs to be part of your portfolio. So building your capability and ability to understand and utilize the tools where they are now and where they're going in the future, because the changes are just so rapid that even 3 months of not participating is going to set you back a ton. And so for the folks that are thinking about doing this, setting up a habitual practice across the team of where are the places this can be utilized. And I think of things like talent intelligence, intake meetings, summarizing candidate debriefs. There are lots of real practical applications out there that can be replicated at scale and shared across both small and large teams.
That's interesting, right? Because when you break it down like that into these little bite-sized pieces, it also gives you an opportunity to say, what's the priority and what is the capabilities in the market, right? So you're not asking your team to eat the elephant, for lack of a better term, but really look at the pieces in a smaller way and say, all right, this AI is ready for this. It's not ready for that. We'll get more into that.
I think that to kind of build off of Ben's point here and thinking about it from like the RecOps angle, I think that right now everybody needs a little bit of RecOps in them. And I think that that's one of the things that RecOps people do, I think exceedingly well, is be overly pedantic. And I think that right now, in order to make sure that like you're going to use AI effectively, you can't just sort of ask the open-ended questions of even the people involved in pieces. You need to be able to very clearly articulate like what are your goals and how are your goals going to be met by using technology or human ingenuity. I think that we're seeing a lot of folks right now in our space also adopting a selfish software mindset of like really going in and building like what they need and no longer sitting around and waiting. And I think both being pedantic, having a builder or builder mindset is allowing curiosity to lead the way in our space. And I think to Ben's point, if you're not being curious and you're not encouraging that curiosity within yourself, within your own teams, and encouraging people to break things in a constructive way, I think that you are also setting your teams up for just sort of much of the same.
Yeah, you need to start experimenting, right, guys? You have to start playing with this stuff, and you'll learn, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, you can go to any of the major players right now in most things, get a demo account for 7 days or whatever it is, or even for free, test something out. It's not like it's connected to anything that you've got that can blow up in your face. You know, just set up something dummy, break something, figure out where you went wrong, and then at the end of every prompt, ask the system a question of like, how do I do this better? How do I do this more efficiently? What do you need to see? Give me the feedback.
It's a great point, right? So before you even start, I see you, Kevin.
Kevin's
Before you even go play with tools that have been specialized into the space, like I would say, just go out and play with what's out there, right? And don't just do it for RecOps. Do it because you need to write a letter to your mom and you want to tell her that you don't like Christmas dinner gravy. I don't know, whatever it is. But all right, it's just my husband that doesn't like my mother.
Used it to help me write the first draft of letters to birth mothers for my adoption stuff. So like,
exactly, right?
Good for getting advice on just about everything and how to be able to do the things that you need to do.
But do it with a critical eye, knowing, right? Because what we were talking about just before we get started, right, Ben, is what is the accuracy rate of the AI in the market right now? Like, what does that look like from across the board? Is it doing it, getting it right? And I think you had some good data, right? You are data driven.
Well, I don't know
For
if I
those that
had
can't see Ben's
data.
sweatshirt.
Yep. Well, I didn't have the data. I asked Gemini, tell me what you think the answer to this question is. And it came back and said, look, from a recruiting perspective, we're 85% accurate. And it came back with a very hard number. It was shocking that it didn't say a range. It didn't give additional context. It made a very clear stance of 85%, and then proceeded to give some context and some loose citations to different publications that are out there. But Leah made a good point before we jumped on, which is, well, that's probably a single threaded action, right? Like when you start to peel that back and you ask it more complex questions combined together, where does it start to unravel, and how accurate do you get back as a response, especially for the things that are not as straightforward. And we all know in the hiring space, it's not as straightforward as A to B.
And the other part is, does accuracy matter, right? So I'm going to come back to this. Kevin, I know you had a question. Do you want to jump in? And then we're going to come back to this, I think.
No, so this year in our Candy benchmark research, I've never seen this dramatic drop in the recruiting team size. So like over 80% of the participating companies this year approximately have all reduced sizes in recruiting team size. And Leah, you and I were talking recently about what kind of internal training goes on with recruiting teams, from recruiters to RecOps to across it all, just to even stay consistent in the delivery of recruiting and hiring, much less really becoming, prompt engineers, which they're still behind the curve in that regard. How do we get that training culture instilled so all these things are embraced and utilized? Because it's a really big struggle for companies.
I think it's across the board too. It's not just the recruiters. Oh, Charisse, I'm gonna just put you on mute if that's okay. I think it's a challenge across all organizations, right? You have some people who can't wait to go put their fingers on the keyboard and play with these different tools that are out in the market, either specialized or the generics. And then you've got other folks who are, skittish, uncertain. They don't want they don't want to do it. It's outside of their norm. They're not comfortable. They don't know what to do with it. They've had a bad experience. So like just getting training when you have that range of people and experiences and willingness to try, I think is a really big challenge. But I do think that it's an important thing to do is to get everybody just putting their fingers on it and trying something. And the reason being, when you start rolling out these tools, they don't have some comfort level using some of these generative AI tools. I think it makes it hard for them to be critical about what they're seeing and getting for responses. And is it right? Right?
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
To build on that, Leah, I think one of the things within the recruiting operations space that we talk about is the level of curiosity that recruiting operations people need to have in order to be effective, because we have to constantly be iterating. We have to constantly be experimenting. And I think one of the things, at least internally to our teams, that we have likely over-indexed on is the idea that everybody on our team is as curious as we are. And that's the piece where we, as a function or as an enablement function for stakeholder groups within our own place, we have to encourage that level of curiosity in order to get to people doing the things that they're eventually going to either need to do to be able to move themselves forward. I think that there are within all of the systems work, I think that there's certainly a level of complexity that can be taught, but you have to encourage people to understand that complexity. And then I think to your point, you talk about the team size of recruiting teams changing. I think one of the things that I'm really curious to see is when people issue those reports, are they talking about just full headcount, or are they talking about full-time employees plus contractors plus temporary folks that are stepping in? And what does that look like when they're answering it? Because I think that there are probably some people who are addressing only FTE headcount, and it's not maybe taking into account, for example, Meta, which hired back a whole bunch of people for their recruiting teams, but they're in this sort of like weird, hey, yes, you're full-time, but you don't have benefits, you don't have stock accrual, you don't have weird sorts of things. So it's like, where do the numbers start to point to?
And Jeremy, that's a fair point, because it's literally just asking one size fits all. What is your current recruiting team size? So we're not getting any more granular in that regard. So that's a fair point, though.
I'm curious. I'm sorry, Leah. I'm curious.
Nope.
Kevin, you talked a little bit about the enablement pieces and like the training and how much that and the headcount is changing and what that's going to look like. I'm curious if there's a benchmark, how much were teams doing this already? Like how much were recruiting teams invested in ongoing learning and development and training before this technology really came on the scene to where they are now?
I wish I had that. I don't. That's a great, no, it really is a great question. That's not one thing that we capture, so should capture it, right, Jerry? Yeah. Maybe that's something we'll add. Well, something we'll add, man. Thank you.
I love it. Hey, thanks, Kevin, because I really see, like, we talk a lot about recruiting operations, and I don't want to get us off topic. And enablement is sometimes listed under recruiting operations, and I wonder sometimes, is that going to flip over the next 12 to 18 months, where it's recruiting enablement and operations becomes a function under the holistic enablement of recruiting teams altogether?
Well, and Ben, I mean, I think you and I have seen this, which is, now you start to see titles that are like recruiting operations and enablement, or TA strategy and enablement. And I think that it's one of those things where, a couple of years ago, the only time you were seeing enablement roles were posted for like sales enablement. So, there is that trailing indicator of like, what are we going to be seeing in other spaces, and now bringing into the TA ops space. But I think one of the other things that's kind of curious about it all too is like, I think we're starting to see that gap shorten, because like when you think about the trailing indicator for like RecOps, it was sales and MarOps popped up first. Like revenue operations, sales operations is going on, I think, like 25, 30 years. Marketing operations has been around for like 40, 50. Most people think that marketing operations came after sales operations, but you're starting to see that timeline now become more and more and more consolidated as like tool complexity has gone out and people started to say data. I think that right now, at least in our space, when we start talking about data and all of that, it's you and I were having a conversation earlier this week. It's like, you have to have the data literacy, you have to have the financial literacy, you have to understand how these two things can come together. And now we're starting to see RecOps folks take public statements like the P&L sheets, start using that data and sort of say like, all right, based on what you're seeing on the P&L, what are we going to be predicting 3 quarters out, or like a quarter out, half year out, to make sure that we're positioning everything that we need to be able to do, that we've like done the upfront work, so we're not playing from behind anymore. And I think that getting TA teams to that proactive level, I think AI is allowing us to bring in other places and other learning. And it also is allowing RecOps to not be the place where you've parked things, where it's like, well, as a recruiter, I'm not going to do this. The RecOps team is going to handle this. And it's like, we're no longer the basement in the attic. We're being proactively involved in things. And I think that's what's also making recruiting operations attractive as a field to a lot of people.
I think it's an interesting thing to think about, this combination of enablement and ops, right? Because as these organizations reduce headcount, well, make everything smaller, bring AI in, it's going to be better. Are those really the same person? Think about the skill set you need to do enablement, to take what you're asking people to do and teach them, help them be self-sufficient, which is different, I think, the teaching element, than let's look at the data, let's use that to drive a data-driven prediction, let's then use that to make decisions around tooling, around process. Like, there's a reason why those two don't live together in sales. Sales ops and sales enablement are not ever the same thing. They're not the one person. Those are different people, they're different roles, and they come out of different people. Like, you see a lot of times the enablement people from a sales perspective often come out of product marketing, right? Because they can talk to the product and find the answer and teach from that perspective. So it's a thing that I always worry when you see this right now in recruiting, around recruitment marketing and recruitment branding. Again, putting those two together, and I'd say recruitment marketing is closer to recruitment ops in terms of data and numbers and understanding what's happening than it is to branding, which just happens to have another marketing term. So we stick them together. I'm going to tie this one up and ask you guys a completely different question. Are you ready? Actually, there are 2 questions that came. I'm going to combine them. I have an overwhelming number of vendors reaching out to me on a weekly basis about AI and recruiting. Do you have any tips on how to evaluate which are good? While we're at that, what should we consider when we're looking at these AI tools? How do we tell what is real versus what is a future state? I would say all of it's future state. So start from that position. Let's go from there.
I mean, this is going to sound very esoteric and very like philosophical, but I think that my answer to that question is, you have to understand what your what your AI strategy is first before even evaluating any other tool. So if you're at a company where your AI strategy is we're trying to have co-pilots here, then immediately anything that comes up and is pitching you replacement is probably not going to be a tool that you are necessarily trying to use. Whereas if you come in and you're saying like, actually, we're trying to go and replace these things, then your evaluation criteria is going to also be very, very different. I think the what's good part can also be addressed by a lot of these tools now are offering free trials. And I think that it's important to understand that like right now we're seeing model acceleration, like new models drop like every other week, it feels like. And it seems like there's this competitive laddering of like, oh, well, Gemini just released this, or Google just released this, and OpenAI just released that, and DeepSeek is releasing something in the next couple of days that's going to make, Skynet look like, a walk in the park. I think that when you look at that, there's those pieces. And then the other thing too is, I mean, we're seeing a lot of tools that are very specific to like one model. So it's like we built this using ChatGPT, or we built this using Anthropic. And there are companies that are like, we can't work with ChatGPT. We can't work with Anthropic. And if that's the space that your company is in, I think that actually addresses like, how do you weed out vendors at a very different kind of level than just like, hey, it seems like everybody is pitching the exact same thing to me.
One thing you can do, one thing you can do, Jeremy, is a lot of these new AI companies will let you do free pilots. So ask them, tell them you want to see it in action first before you can do anything with it. But
100%.
Have them give it to you for free first and go from there.
Yeah. Or negotiate very, very short-term contracts.
Yeah.
I would start though with what Ben said at the beginning, which is walk through your business and your process and outline where it is that you feel that you need AI first. And honestly, ignore the rest, right? Tackle one thing at a time. I think part of what's challenging is there's this barrage of companies solving lots of different problems. But if you haven't first articulated what your problem is that you want to solve, all you're going to do is see shiny objects that are really cool. And I think that can get exhausting, right? Because like, how many trials does your team really want to do for a thing they don't necessarily know what problem they're out to solve, right? So when you are looking at these, get narrow, pick one problem in the business and go after it. If your conclusion is there is no good option today, then find another problem to work on. But I would say I would not take all the calls. I don't think you can. I think you'd be exhausted. And I don't know if you would know what
you're calls and assess it and be
really get your co-pilot to take those phone calls. Like, do a demo. I like it. Poor salespeople. Oh, heartbreaker. On the other side of this, there are a lot of legal and regulatory compliance pieces that come. Some of them are your business saying we can't use Anthropic, we can't use ChatGPT or whatever it might be. Don't touch DeepSeek. But there are also just global implications from a legal and regulatory perspective. And worse, in the US, there are state level regulations at times. And just as a side note, your vendor is not responsible for any of those. That you as the buyer, you as the company who is actually consuming and using the product are responsible for being in compliance. So things to think about, right? How do you balance that? What is the best way to manage your vendors when you have legal and compliance challenges that come along with tools like that are embedded in the AI options?
I'll jump in here. One of the things that I've seen and I've started with in all of these vendor conversations, I need you to list out all your sub-processors and start there. Usually it weeds out a pretty fair number of people, shockingly, that won't go through the process with you because the sub-processors won't go through the process with you for data and how it's retained, how it's being used, the requirements typically for SOC 2 testing, bias testing, all of the different things that are becoming more and more required, to Leah's point, state by state, nationally. You have GDPR, you have all the things that are popping up. And then the other question that we consistently talk about or ask are, what are you going to be able to do when regulations change? So if literally the terms in the contract change mid-contract, how fungible is that relationship going to continue to be? Because there's no way, as the person consuming the product and the person building the product could have anticipated that the law would have changed in the time that the contract was there. And how do you build those provisions in ahead of time and agree on what that change management process looks like?
So I have this story I've told people. I know, Kevin, you've heard this from me like 6 times. I had a cold call. Somebody cold called me, and it was an AI. And it took me a little while to figure out that it was an AI because it was really, really good. And I had to ask it a couple of times for it to come clean and tell me that it was agentic. But after I got off the call, I went, I never consented to this phone call. So what is that? Well, for those of us who are old and enjoy a good regulatory speech here, TCPA says that robotic calls you have to opt into, you have to explicit opt-in. And these AI cold calling tools mean you have to have opted into it. So from a sourcing perspective, I think from a recruiting perspective, I actually can see where you can opt in on the application through the privacy policy. There's lots of ways to do opt-in that way. But if you're an outbound sourcer, I don't know how and I have seen a tool that somebody's building for outbound calling, outbound emailing, outbound texting, but like you've got to get opt-in on those. And again, that vendor isn't responsible for it. So if you buy it and you use it, it's on you. So these are things where I often will say, as much as we love the lawyers, bring in the lawyers, right? Like, I think you have to do a legal review on any of these AI tools because there's no way as just a regular human being doing your job, you're going to know all of the nuances that you need to know for this kind of adoption and tooling. Jeremy, you have a...
Well, I'm giggling because, we like to talk about music and musical references, and I'm just thinking of like Funeral March of the Marionettes right now. It's just like, what are you doing with all of the agents, and how are you dealing with those compliance regulations? I mean, I know that one of the big tools out there is, Warden, and Warden is certainly helping on the bias side, and they're about to drop a really interesting report next week. So it's just one of those pieces where all of this is again changing really, really rapidly. And I think going back to one of the questions at the top of the hour, I think that there are a number of people who are sitting and waiting to see where the dust is going to settle before investing a full skill set into something. And we see this happen in a number of industries whenever new technology emerges. And I think one of the things that is going to be really interesting to see is, do people now do a little bit more discovery work, and how is RecOps going to enable that discovery work to happen in the constructive ways and be balanced?
As a sort of continue to pull this thread around these tools, I see this one where Kevin says free trials have no skin in the game. People don't use them that much. You guys are saying try them. One of the reasons I believe free trials fail is because they are outside of the normal process, right? But it's interesting, is a lot of these tools that are coming out to market don't have an element where they integrate into your existing tech stack. They don't know how to do that yet. So what are you guys thinking about that? Is that something that's going to be like a must-have now, must-have in 6 months? Like what's the feeling of making it work within the recruiter's workflow today versus working, it will get there in 6 months or a year?
Some of them are just like Chrome extensions now at this point. They don't.
Yeah, I mean, Ben, do you want to go?
No, go for it.
So I think what I'm going to be really interested to see and really kind of hopeful for is, like, I know in the past that there's sort of been this level of like, hey, well, we're going to test this on we're going to pick one role, and we're going to assign this new tool to this one role, and we're going to test it along that line. And that's how we're going to sort of do that. I think what's interesting about the structural integrity of like what the data is going to be is that like the AI pieces with the APIs and what it calls and things like that is pulling in a lot more. And so what I'm kind of wondering we'll see is, will some of the ATS vendors allow for you to sort of create, I'll call it a box or a prison or whatever you want to do, or a vertical, where you can put a role that you are allowing to test and the data will sort of flow internally correctly, but you can sort of isolate something and say you are only on this sort of particular thing, much in a way that like you allowed agency recruiters to only have visibility to like one role. And then you can use that to sort of test, as opposed to sort of being like, okay, now we got to go through this full security review of your tool because your tool is going to have access to all of the data. It's sort of, how do we create the walls for the sandbox that this tool will be able to test in? And then to your point, you can get more of effective testing out of just testing it in that thing for a set period of time.
The other thing to think about from a free trial standpoint is around data ownership, right? So if you're free trialing something, I'm not against free trials, by the way. I just want to make sure everybody understands the like both sides of it. But if you're free trialing something, you're probably not signing anything, which means they're also not signing anything. So who owns the data? Who owns the output? In fact, let's say you do sign something and you've used AI. Who owns the data? Who owns the output? It's really clear that the data in your ATS belongs to you. I feel like every organization knows how to make that rule a hard and fast one. But as it's leaving the ATS to go into this AI, it's going to be manipulated. There's going to be some output that comes out. That's going to go back into your ATS. The back end, you could probably say you have ownership rights to, or co-ownership rights to. But what about that output? Like, what do you guys think about when you're talking to these vendors and market around the data ownership on the output of the AI based on the data you inputted? Oh, you didn't know that was coming. I didn't write that one down ahead of time. Sorry, guys.
I was going to let Ben go.
Jerry,
Oh,
I thought Jerry was going to jump in. This is like his kind of question.
It's something we talk about a ton of where that ownership is, and a lot of times it comes down to it is co-ownership. That's really where I've seen the majority of the conversations land with the legal team. It's we own it, you own it. Also with the caveat that whatever it went through was deleted. Right? So you can see the out and you can see the output, but nobody knows the black box of what it did in the middle, which I think is really fascinating and is a part that we should probably talk about too. Like, why don't, if I was a candidate, I'd probably want to know what that thing did to go from A to B.
I mean, that is the whole premise of the Workday lawsuit right now, right? What is in the black box? What is happening?
What's in the box? No, and I think that it's good that Ben kind of addressed that first part, because Ben is on an in-house team. I think one of the things that hasn't yet been, or at least I've not been seen, is like, so I help companies implement tools, select the tools, go through that whole process. And so at a certain point in time, there becomes this thing of like, well, all right, if I'm the one who helped recommend this tool and something happens, what is the liability concern that I have because somebody made the selection that I did? So I'm really going to be kind of curious to see how that pans out, because if you build a resource, a lot of these things, you can't really transfer the ownership from one person to another. I mean, look at Zapier integrations and how those things play. And then when the person leaves, it's like the whole thing comes crashing down.
Gemini today, right? If you build gems on a corporate account and that person leaves, you can't transfer those gems anywhere. They go into
right. And so it's one of those things where I'm going to be really, really interested to see is that for people who are helping with the AI transition, what's the liability that person is going to have to inherit within the decision-making process? What happens when somebody wants to picks the wrong thing, and now it's like, oh, well, now you just exposed all of my data. It's like, well, ultimately, yes, I made the recommendation. It's sort of like you buy your kid a really expensive car and then the kid drives it into a wall and you're like, well, what happened here? Like, how much is it the kid's decision versus my own to enable that level of power? And so I'm closely monitoring on those AI pieces, because what happens if you build something and you have to keep it open on an account? in order for people to keep using it. Now I still have access to that sort of thing. So it's like those little pieces coming together are just something I'm really, really curious about.
Sorry, Leah. I
No,
want
go ahead.
to pose. I want to pose a question for anybody. Will this be the moment that data trusts pop into popularity? Anybody hasn't followed data trust and like Sidewalk Labs and some of the medical data that's out there? It basically transfers ownership from the corporation to the individual to decide where you can share individual pieces of data, right? For medical records and those kinds of things. Are we at a moment where the technology is going to force the hand of those things and those things are going to pop into existence, or is something else going to pop up?
I'm going to vote. It's going to happen in the EU. EU will do that. They're already in that. They're already on that trend anyway, right? The EU has taken a position of you own your own data. You are the owner of your data. You may allow organizations to use it for some period of time for the purpose of which they need to use it, but then it has to go away, right? But in the US, we don't take that position. As soon as you hand your data over to a company, the company owns your data. Company is the owner of your data, and it is their decision. I think that it will take a very long time for the US to make that shift. I do think, though, you will have organizations who find themselves in a position where they have to do it because of lawsuits, because of bad press, because of that. I think
faster.
Workday
Yeah.
AI is being sued right now. Yeah.
Leah, it will be faster.
You think so?
I think the Mobley case is evidence of that. It's still going to take a couple of years, but the fact is, it's the first time that both the technology and the employer or the individual is held accountable, and the courts will figure what the weighting is in that as part of court cases. But fundamentally, for the first time now, we're going to be in a position where we can collect data on all of Workday's clients. And that's going to give us outcome information that will indicate whether or not there was an institutional problem. We don't have to look in the black box. We can know what the answer is from the outcomes of what transpired. If you ask 100 million people whether they were over 40 and were not hired, you're going to have data that allows for you to determine whether the probability is that qualified people out of representation or underrepresented were in fact dismissed. And so I think it's going to have a lot of lawsuits coming in a very short period of time.
Yeah, the guy who's suing Workday is an older guy, older gentleman, I believe.
Yeah.
It's an ageism suit, and even if it goes downhill relative to how the courts decide, the very fact that you're going to have the public know about a class action suit, hundreds of millions of people being asked questions like that. I mean, imagine that Workday has to tell each and every one of their clients that they're going to send an email to each and every applicant that they've had in the last 5 years. And you're the head of TA, and you have to go to the CHRO and explain what just happened. The CHRO's got to go to the CEO and explain that every applicant in the last 5 years is going to be asked whether they're over 40 and were not hired by your company.
I mean, Jerry,
It's going to blow the shit out of everything, and that's going to happen the next couple. Within the next year.
Jerry, I'm gonna agree with you here, because the other thing too is I've been waiting for all those Workday profiles that I had to create in order to give my password to actually have some use. So like, I'm sorry, Workday, for your hostile architectural design, but I'm really looking forward to having to address that email.
Think about the hundreds of lawyers who are going to say, if we can get a class action suit where we can get the technology to go after every client's applicants, we could probably really demonstrate and prove whether or not there's a problem. So I think it's going to trigger a lot of other kinds of lawsuits.
We've gone a little off, but I want to throw one more element in. Did you all see
I'll
that?
shut up.
Oh, the greenhouse rolled out the new candidate validation to get rid of fraud by using
Clear, yeah.
Clear, which I don't know if you all have done Clear before, but the things that Clear knows about you, it's got your facial recognition, your date of birth, your social security number, like your last 15 years of utility bills. I don't know. They got everything. So
Well, but so two things to that. One is I think we've all traded that information for convenience, because naturally humans, our brains are going to do whatever is the most convenient. I think going back to all the workday stuff that's going to be really interesting is, one, I'm going to be really curious to see what other ATS's responses are, because that's probably going to open up. But I'm also going to be really curious to see, like, one, how does that change ATS design? How does that change the data management design? How does that change any of the AI training design? But I'm also going to be really curious to see is what is the impact this is going to have on application questions that we've been using? Like, is this now a feature that is going to have to be totally and completely eliminated? And if it's not completely eliminated, what is it going to be tied to? And I think one of the things that was really very fascinating from work that Ben and I did together last year was our application questions were immediately tied to the like critical pieces of the roles themselves. So it's like, if we said you must have 5 years of X, if the question was, do you have 5 years of X? And it was nothing like flimsy outside of just like, we're just confirming that you kind of just read the job description and like these are the minimum qualifications only, and that's going to sort of change how
there's actually a lot of data we collect on candidates that have nothing to do with the job, right? Your street address. Ben, you and I talked about this. The street address of my home, literally not relevant. Now, maybe you need to know my zip code because of a commute distance or a territory or whatever it might be, maybe, right? Do I need an email to do the job? Probably not. I have a phone number. You can call me, right? Do you need my last name? Probably not. Not to determine minimum qualifications. You definitely don't need the EEOC OFCCP questions, except you do because you're legally required to, but you don't to do the. Okay, that's confusing for everybody, right? There are a lot of questions we ask. I mean, I just saw the other day somebody asked for the last 4 digits of a social security number. Like, why? I know why. I know why. They are trying to validate, did you work here before? That's what they're trying to do. But that's not actually necessary to determine qualifications. And like we've conflated a lot of the process and put up on the front onto the candidate to make the life of the recruiter or the onboarding team easier. And that's why we do a lot of these things. And also because database design, right? So if you think about Workday, if you put in your name and you put in your, let's say you don't use your own first name, you use your middle name as your name, you put that as your first name, that's going to break onboarding for a Workday. Right? If you have if you use a masked email like for Apple, right? And you put that in as your email for Workday, it'll break onboarding. Like there's a lot of things that break onboarding in Workday from database design perspective. And so a lot of this stuff, I don't know how these ATSs adjust because a lot of this is so embedded into the design itself of the database.
But I want to throw this one out there, and Ben and I have had this conversation too. It's like, is TA's job to make HR's job less work? Should we care that this is going to cause issues for the onboarding elements of things to do that? Like, is that our problem, and why are we trying to solve for that?
I mean, when it brings your whole Workday instance down, I think you care. Just saying.
I mean, how many TA people actually want Workday to be good?
Well, there's that. All right, fair enough.
But I cut off Ben. Ben, I think you were going to say something.
No, I think you both make good points. I think the way that recruiting has designed, or ATSs have designed the product, is to do too much all at once, right? They're trying to do everything too early in the process to expedite it for the 2%, 3%, 5% of people that ultimately make it to the end, where you actually need to collect some real information about the subsequent steps that need to happen as part of onboarding steps, which you both rightfully mentioned. But from the beginning, to Leah's point, I need your name and I need a way to contact you if I want to interview you. And that's it. And I need to know
the focus has to be on decisions
Correct.
and only the data we need for decision making. And the reality is, the only decision I really need is, did you do a little due diligence and read the goddamn job description and you actually have an interest in this job? I would maintain that if you have paid for an AI to search the world for every title that could represent something of what I might want, and then apply independent of me ever knowing anything, just apply to 50,000 different places or whatever. I would argue that we should not consider them candidates, that they fundamentally have to have an intention to want to work for you. And that's all I really need, because then I could use AI to collect data from them that's important for the next step in the decision process. And then fundamentally, I could be arguing to the candidate that by doing it this way, by talking to and engaging a automated, avatar, that you are getting up to bat, along with the 322 other people who applied for this particular role. And so I will be fair with you as an avatar, and fundamentally I will converse with my peers around you getting a human. And if not, then if you don't get the human, I'll come back and tell you why not.
But Jerry,
And defend it.
How do you, because with the rise in serial applications and just the volume period, but how do you discern that intent though from the candidate as you're explaining it, that they're truly?
I didn't say, well, I think AI's got a ways to go to get there, but I do think that fundamentally I'm seeing more capabilities, if you will, of being able to handle the top of the funnel, and then use the Candies kind of data that we've been collecting for 15 years. That basically suggests we need to set proper expectations. We shouldn't just show up in front of the 300 candidates. We should be explaining to them that no human's going to interview 322 candidates. That fundamentally I will, and I'll do it at your convenience. And I'll be asking you the same questions I ask everyone, so it'll be fairer, and I'm capable of probing in 26 different freaking languages.
Right.
So,
and that's the only way that we're going to solve for the volume, is that the AI tech has to get better. We have to keep testing it and training it, and companies have to be willing to use it within compliance constraints, et cetera. There's
what I love about the thread of this conversation is that, the tools that we're fundamentally using, like an ATS, weren't set up for that.
Right.
It started 20 some odd years ago to collect as much frickin' data in as fast as possible. And then don't tell anyone. You can turn off the feature to ever tell them that we're not going forward with you.
Right.
So you can sit by the phone as long as you want.
It's interesting, right? Because the AI piece that fits in all of this only works in the ATS that you're using, or whatever the system of record is. I don't care, call it whatever you like. But this is where automation has to be part of the conversation. AI alone is nothing, right? AI without automation it has to have an automated component to it. And that automation is where you bring in the predictability. It's where you bring in the rules. It's where you bring in the rails, right? Without that automation component, right? So this is why when I think about free trials and testing these things, there's no rails, there's no automation. It's just a box by itself.
So back, Leah, I'm going to shut up right after this, but the back to the reason why you had this conversation is that means we have to enhance our ability for oversight of all those rules and rails and whatever. And that means more IO psych folks. That means a bunch of other folks that are going to be helpful for us in terms of being able to do that. And then we can do the automation at the level that we're talking about. And obviously waiting for AI to have that skill set.
Go, Ben.
I'm going to ask potentially a provocative question. Aren't we just moving the problem further along? So we're going to transition it from resumes to automated interviews, because at some point somebody's going to get keen to
But
record my interviews.
Ben,
right?
the resumes suck.
They do suck.
The resumes suck. But if
Mm.
you give me as an AI the ability to talk to 322 people for as long as I goddamn want, and they want, because I've set my expectations, I can collect better data, more consistent data. And by consistency, I mean being able to collect data in the same way each and every time. No human can do it twice and do it the same way.
Well, Jerry,
So fundamentally, we're going to be able to, we have to collect better data that is more defensible.
Well, what I'm positing, Jerry, in here is, at some point I'm going to have enough data to be able to create my own avatar and interview with your avatar, and
I
my
like it.
avatar is going to defeat your
I
avatar.
like it. And if we can figure out how to blockchain
Ah.
the verification of all of that shit, we're even further along.
well, I think
I'm
so
gonna get out of this because I
think
you guys are
I think,
having too
Jerry,
much fun.
So I think
Sims
that
realities.
there's a couple of things happening. One is too, I think, there is that future where we're all talking about how do we get it to agent pieces so that we do all those things. I think one of the more interesting things that I'm hearing coming out of a lot of different recruiting operations teams is, so I'll start with the question, which is, when is enough data enough? But what I'm starting to hear people do is, now, to your point, if we can have a AI basically do the initial interviewing, I'm seeing a lot of people use tools like Talent Llama and basically saying, okay, you've submitted the application, we set up an auto move step, everybody gets an interview with these tools, and now we have sort of two indicator pieces here, which I think in a lot of ways will fundamentally change how what recruiters are doing from a review process to get more indicators, more elements, because you can do that. You can have an hour-long interview with a candidate that the candidate can do at any point in time that's convenient for them, and they can just really go very comprehensive in their answers and not feel rushed. So it will be interesting to see, to Ben's point, where does the needle move? But it'll also be really interesting to see when is there enough data? And then also on top of that, how are people going to use these tools to try and create a more human experience with AI? Because now you sort of feel like, hey, I've had 2 touch points within this experience as a candidate, and now I feel like I actually had the opportunity to explain what a piece of paper couldn't explain for me.
I will say one of the things that I'm worried about in all of these things that we're talking about is the overuse of AI in all of this, right? And where I particularly worry about it is I've heard now a whole bunch of things around oversight, about better data. And when you start putting AI into your reporting, we have the AI reporting on the AI outcomes of the AI. Forget your avatar. I don't even know what's going on anymore, right? Do we think we're going to swing on the pendulum too far where AI is going to be injected into too many things, real or fake AI, to be fair? All right, somebody said to me the other day, some of it's capital AI, some of it's still lowercase. It's your job to figure out which one.
Shar's got a good note there in the chat there, Leah. You see that? But how do we manage candidates in countries that find very creative ways to cheat? The candidates that are using AI for nefarious purposes. That's happening.
Yeah.
It's only growing, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
We have to. We're definitely going to have to verify. But we have to. Again, it's back to making those choices because you have the proper level of oversight. You have which has humans involved. And a variety of other things that we can do this. I think this is fascinating. This is a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We are actually rounding up on time here, folks. Let's add one last question into the mix, right? What are, in your opinion, the quick wins right now in recruiting ops to bring in AI? This is like lightning round. Let's go.
Ben,
Ben,
you
you're
go.
up.
Communication.
Better emails, better.
Better emails, better automation, simpler, more consistent, more effective. There's a lot of information and data out there that you can just program that and make that a lot cleaner. You're going to increase a lot of conversion rates and a lot of consistency in your process and stop losing so many people in the middle of your funnel.
Simplicity. I think we're adding weight. We're trying to solve a problem by adding too many things, too many pieces to the puzzle, too many pieces in the pot, too many tools, too many anything like that. I think the minute you fine tune that, you simplify it, you create the clear north, clear constellation that you're doing, you're actually going to do your team a solid. And I think ultimately a lot of RecOps teams, that's what we are tasked with doing is don't make it more complicated. Make it as simple, make it as Occam's razored as possible.
Jerry, you got one to throw in here?
Just centralization of decision processes, I think, is going to be a long-term value add.
Kevin, you got one? Because you've been part of this today.
All of those things. Yeah,
All the
all
small
of those
things.
Leah. All of those things. No, I mean that, and just going back to just my first comment about just ensuring. I mean, this also includes training. Can be also working with your vendors too, since the companies have multiple systems in their tech stacks. But just better, consistent training, not only around recruiting process, but in RecOps and how to making sure that we're actually using the tools as we should be. Optimization, utilization. So.
All right, my contribution to this would be have a lunch hour or happy hour of some sort with whoever is your most AI forward person in your recruiting team, and have them throw up on the screen, show how they use ChatGPT, show how they use Perplexity, show how they use like start using what gems are. Like anybody on the call doesn't know what a gem is, go figure it out if you use Gemini, right? These are the ways I think you start, because until you have a baseline understanding, I think all these tools are just shiny objects.
Lunch and learns. That's what we used to call them back at the
Yeah, now it's
Gardner, yeah.
it's definitely a BYOB situation these days with all the remote people. But you guys, we're at time. Good. This was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody that joined us. Kevin and Jerry for jumping in. I know you weren't our scheduled guests, but we love the extra voices at the table. And we have finalizing up who's going to be next month, but bear with us. Third Wednesday of July, we are going to be back. Same time, same bat channel, Chris and I. And thank you all. We're going to send out the recording later. And
Yeah, we're gonna put it on YouTube as well. Our new YouTube channel.
YouTube. Yeah, Chris has got a YouTube channel. I guess we're famous now. And for fun, I'm going to throw all the questions that we got into GPT and see what it says for the answers to the questions that we asked. And we'll see if there's a difference. So thanks, everybody. Have a fabulous Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
JobSync out.